should all be able to you should all be able to see that. So I'm going to do my best to stay within the time limit. That's my goal for today. Okay. All right. Some of you may know me through the Deflection Academy training, which I've been lucky enough to be a part of, or because you've read my book. The book was written and published not because I was so unique, but because my experience with my daughter's addiction was so very similar to so many other people across the country and really across the world. Some of you may have lived my experience, and if you have, I'm very sorry. But if you're sitting here, that means that you, like myself, didn't want to see anyone else walk this road unsupported. Unfortunately, all too often the family becomes the collateral damage of addiction, and if help for people struggling is difficult to navigate and often inadequate, help for the family is almost non-existent. I think anybody that's gone through this as a family member knows that. I was a special education teacher, and this was a second career, so I have a bunch of letters after my name, which is supposed to mean I know things. But I felt that although I had a lot of educational and prior personal experience, I was completely ill-equipped to deal with my daughter's addiction. That time in my life was very painful, and I had nowhere to go for facts or information that I could actually trust. I had well-meaning peers who knew about as much or maybe a little more than I did, and treatment center marketers that I definitely couldn't trust. I swore if I ever got to the other side of this, I would become the person that I needed when I was going through it. And I've spent the better part of the last decade trying to educate myself into being that person. And I continue to, do that and try to improve and pass on everything that I've learned. And I'll try to offer a perspective and a few solutions today. So thank you very much for the opportunity. This is the truest statement. Everybody suffers when one person uses. And I've been taught a lot of things about addiction, but no lesson was harder or more valuable than my own experience, my personal experience walking through this with my child. Someone I never expected to take this detour. I learned everything I needed to know right after I needed to know it. And that's not when people should be learning. And we have such trouble because we're so, for the most part, understaffed and families need so much help. But there's literally an army of untrained, devoted volunteers to help if we could just educate them on what to do. Families are suffering, but also the place where people go when they're in recovery or when they're in need is back home to their families. So the ideal person to lead this is our family members. Instead, typically, these are some of the things that they're told. And as a family recovery coach now, most of my clients come to me after being told a variety of things like this by professionals. So I ask you, please don't say these things, especially that they can't help. Because families, and when I say families, I mean anybody that's supporting a loved one with a substance use disorder. They will do something. They will do things that they shouldn't do. They will do anything because they can't just do nothing. And if they're not educated, if they're not connected, and if they're not taking care of themselves, they tend to do things and act in a way that's anything other than helpful. And that was my middle name when I was going through it. So I say that from experience. So I'm all about facts and evidence. We can feel strongly about our views, but we need to be able to back it up with facts. So how do we get families educated and professionals aware of the need? Certainly not by doing what we've always done, because research shows that families feel judged, they feel excluded, and they feel hopeless. And we don't want them to feel like that because that's not helpful for anybody. So what we're doing definitely isn't working. So instead of telling people to cut their family members off, we need to teach family members how to create boundaries for themselves and stay within that sphere of influence so that they can be a positive and loving source of support and that's what I believe is what's needed. I believe families would do that if they knew how. The problem is they don't have the skills. Family influence is the most commonly cited reason for treatment entry among help-seeking substance users. Stigma and shame in those defeating stories that about them not being able to participate in their loved one's recovery, not being able to help. Those are the things that keep them from obtaining those skills. This needs to change. So what do families need and what should it look like? So we want families to feel like they can be a loving source of support, that they're educated on the science behind addiction, that they're connected to others as well as resources for their own recovery, and that they can be part of the recovery plan. And we can help families, definitely help families get there. I assume that you all have a lot of knowledge about addiction, but what you may not know is how similar it is for the support system. How many times have you heard a parent or loved one say, "Why don't they just stop? Haven't they had enough?" How many times have you thought about a family member or a person that was supporting someone? Why don't they just stop? Haven't they had enough? Well, brain imaging studies with people who have a substance use disorder show that exposure to drug use, so an image or of the drug of choice, resulted in activation of the amygdala and regions of the frontal cortex. So it's a craving. That's what they can see it on an MRI. What you may not know is that when a functional MRI is done of a family member, somebody who's supporting a loved one, in the very beginning, say, this is not, as time goes on, this is the very beginning, the person does not identify as codependent, they don't feel like they're enmeshed. The part of the brain that lights up is the part of the brain that's responsible for logic and reasoning and planning. So that's good because the person say it's their first go around, they say, "I'm going to treatment," and their support system's brain says, "Okay, how can I get them there? I'll drive them, I'll drop them off, this works." And it makes sense. But images of their loved one, when they're shown images of their loved one getting into treatment or the idea of their loved one getting into treatment, and they identify as codependent or fully enmeshed, the parts of the brain that light up are the same parts of the brain that light up in a person who is having a craving, who is addicted to a substance. So it makes perfect sense why families are having a difficult time supporting someone in the way that they hope they would in the moment, because their brain activates as if they were having a craving and they wind up doing things that are unhelpful. So it's they promised themselves they would never give them another $20 because they said they were going into treatment. But that idea of this, once you're fully enmeshed, once those brain changes have happened, we wind up doing things like that. And that's where that comes from. Haven't they had enough yet? So if we can, when I tell parents this, when I tell family members this, and I explain to them what's gone on in their brain, they not only can they hopefully grasp that they have to fight against their brain just like their loved one has to fight a craving, but they also know what a craving feels like. Because often family members wind up doing things they swore they would never do, but they do it because they're not thinking correctly. So where are we going to get this information? Because meetings are the primary place that families get information. Most meetings are an excellent place to connect to others that are experiencing a similar situation. They've also been, up until now, a very unreliable place to get education. Families need education. They need fact, not opinion. We wouldn't do this with any other disease or disorder. And we know we're not alone. I know I'm not alone. Yet we're still going into those meetings and getting information from the loudest voice in the room. So what do we do about this? I'm not suggesting that we do away with current meetings. I'm suggesting we improve them. For me, the answer comes in two ways. First, in changing the way we conduct family support meetings, and secondly, with access to coaching for the support system. I repeatedly hear and have often said, if I only knew then what I know now. It shouldn't be a mystery. Families shouldn't have to rely solely on the advice of someone else who had a similar experience. We wouldn't do that with any other disorder. I researched what was available when I was putting together the curriculum for these family meetings. What was available at Dana-Farber and Children's Hospital in Boston if a child had cancer. And when a child has cancer, families are taught and supported with evidence-based practices. If that same child years later has a substance use disorder, the family is told to walk away from their loved ones or any of those other suggestions that people often give. In the very meetings that they go to for support. So because I've never been a person that would approach a problem without trying to find solution, I'm going to offer you mine. I created a curriculum-based 26-module family meeting and training, as well as a family recovery coach training. I hope to create avenues for families to never have to say, if I only knew. So the 2-day family coaching specialty training program is designed for recovery coaches and other professionals who want to learn more about the role that coaches play in supporting a family member or loved one with a substance use disorder. We know that recovery coaches play a pivotal role when offered to a person seeking recovery. What if we offer similar services to families? Vermont's doing this, and I train their family recovery coaches. If families, healthy or not, are the number one reason most people seek recovery, and often the place they return to after treatment, why aren't we doing more to help them get healthy so they can be supportive of breaking the cycle? When I began to understand that the only person I had any control over was myself, I started to begin to heal. I thought this was something I could only do if Katie got well, but I started to see that my recovery and hers were two very distinct and separate things. And I desperately needed someone to walk through this with me with facts. The most accessible avenue to educate families is the family meeting. What I created to answer this need is based on what I needed when I was going through this. It needed to answer the questions I didn't know to ask, and in a short format, and provide reliable resources where I could get more information if I needed it, in a safe environment where I could connect with peers and learn to take care of myself. As an educator, I was trained to create curriculum that's scaffolded and build on each lesson. So think about this as like an IOP for families. Short bursts of information on topics that support the support system most likely would not know to ask about. A quick introduction to the stages of change, for example, at the beginning and the middle meeting, and then vetted reliable resources on the topic available if the participant wants more. 10 or 15 minutes of education, that's it. I mean, and some of these topics like post-acute withdrawal syndrome is something that I never knew to even ask about. And I really find a family member when I work with families that have even heard of what that is, much less understand what they're looking at when it's happening. I've been very fortunate, and after 40 plus entries into treatment and nearly as many overdoses, my daughter has nearly 7 years of recovery. Too many people are not that lucky. I felt powerless until I realized that the only person I had any control over was myself. That as I began to become informed and learn how to react and act in a better way, she also began to change. Going through this alongside a loved one is an incredibly painful and confusing ordeal. Knowledge, connection, and self-care can make a difference. And I know that because it did with me. I just don't want it to be as difficult as it was for me with other people.